Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. I now declare the 2018 Brattleboro Union High School District Annual Meeting in order. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Over in that corner. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please remain standing. A moment of silence for those within our district who have passed on within the past year. Thank you. You may be seated. We'd like to begin by introducing both the board and the administrators who are here tonight. I'll have Mr. Ricky Davidson introduce members of the Brattleboro Union High School Board.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. So starting at my far right, your far left is Ann Beekman from Putney, and Ian Torrey from Brattleboro, and then Sean Murphy from Guilford, and Ruth Barton from Dumbarton.
You forgot Katie. She's on the very end.
Oh, sorry, Katie. On the far end is Katie Evers from Brattleboro. Then we have Ann, and then Ian and Sean, then Ruth Barton from Dummerston, Mike Collier from Vernon, Russ Janis from Brattleboro, Bob Woodworth from Brattleboro, and then our business manager, Frank Rucker, Lyle Holliday, our school superintendent, myself, Ricky Davidson, and up here also is Barb Nowakowski, the clerk.
And if I could have the superintendent, Mrs. Holliday, introduce the members of the administration who are here in the audience.
Good evening. We have Michael Burnett, Career Center Director, Drew McDowell, Adult Education Coordinator, Assistant Director of the Career Center, Tom Doughton, Assistant Principal at Brattleboro Area Middle School, Keith Lyman, Principal, Brattleboro Area Middle School, Steve Perrin, Principal of Brattleboro Union High School, Mary Kaufman, Assistant Principal, Brattleboro Union High School, and Kate Margaitis, Assistant Principal, Brattleboro Union High School.
Thank you. Just a few marching orders as we get underway. BCTV is filming the meeting for later broadcast on, I believe, Channel 10. Interpreters tonight are Virginia Clark and Janet Dickinson. The bake sale out in the lobby is being done by the Costa Rica Exchange Chinese Club and German Club. We're pleased tonight to have Wayne Warwick and Be Heard Productions handling our sound. Microphone passers are Alyssa McAllister, Kayla Haskins, and Alex Provence. And our Sergeant at Arms tonight is Captain Mark Anderson from the Windham County Sheriff's Office. Go ahead and wave, Mark. As far as the meeting rules this evening, the standing meeting rules from past years, those wishing to take part in the meeting shall enter and check in with the clerk of your town at the tables near the entrance. You'll be given a voter card to be raised when you wish to speak or have your vote counted. All voters in the reserved sections in the gymnasium. The clerks will be appointed to serve as tellers and ballot counters of any election or division of the House or closed ballot. I will, of course, as I have, appointed a Sergeant at Arms for the meeting. A vote by paper ballot will be had upon demand of 7 or more voters. A division shall be had at the discretion of the moderator or on demand of 6 or more voters. If you've spoken at least once on the question, you will not be entitled to the floor at the exclusion of another who's not yet spoken without leave of the voters. To gain the floor, rise, address the chair, give your name and town of residence. Debate shall be limited to 5 minutes per person speaking on the first time on any article, but in deference to an incident from last year, I will not interrupt someone who is asking questions in the middle of that. So we will let that go unless others wish to take the floor at that point. On the motion of any voter, we can go into a committee of the whole on any pending question. And of course, all parliamentary procedures and rulings shall be governed by Robert's Rules of Order and Vermont State Law Title 16 VSA Section 706J. With that in mind, we will move to Article Number 1 to act upon the reports of the officers.
Mr. Moderator.
Mr. Davidson.
I move that the reports of the district officers be accepted as printed.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded that the reports of the district officers be accepted as printed. Discussion on the motion. Mr. DeGray.
Every year we accept this report and we never get a report on the report that we're accepting. So I would like to query Frank Rucker to give us a brief overview of the report that the auditors went over with you. Thank you.
Mr. Rucker, you are queried.
Good? Okay. Sure. So in the annual report that hopefully you have, and I believe there's copies at the back table, I'm talking about the, the document here, Annual Report 2018. It's also on the Supervisory Union website. In that annual report, we have the full audit. If you go to about the midpoint of the document, we go from page 56 for the budget proposal. Then it starts over, right? Basically, you know, right after page 56, starts over with the audit report, and that is renumbered with page 1. So I'll just give you a very brief overview of the audit report for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2017. As Mr. DeGray has indicated, we have reviewed this with our elected auditors. This is a report prepared by professional CPAs in compliance with generally accepted accounting principles and the specifications of the state of Vermont as required. An important statement on page 2 of the audit is the auditor's opinion. On page 2, you see, if you're following along in the book, there a paragraph. The opinion that we like to see, that we expect to see, is that they find the financial statements comply in all material respects with the generally accepted accounting principles. So there's a little more detail there, but that's essentially what it's saying. It's an unqualified opinion indicating that the financial statements fairly represent the financial condition of the district. The next several pages are summary schedules highlighting different parts of the financial statements. The one that I think kind of pulls together a lot of information that we consider as part of a budget review is page 14, statement of revenues, expenditures, and change in fund balance. And this is for what we call governmental funds. One reason why we remain in good financial condition is, as you can see on page 14, if you're not looking at it, I'll just summarize. We received $28,230,000 in revenues, and when you look at the expenditures, you see $27,893,000, and we also had a transfer of $320,000 to the capital fund. The difference between revenue and expenses is $16,650. You see that at the bottom, net change. What it represents is that we are very close to the authorization by the electorate on what to spend. And it leaves us in a favorable financial position. So that's probably the most significant statement that indicates solvency. Maybe one last point that I could share with you is at the back of the report, there's another auditor statement about internal control and compliance, general compliance. Essentially, the pages 48 and 49 at the very back say that based on the testing that they did, they did not find material weaknesses or significant deficiencies in the internal control process. So overall, we have had a favorable audit report, and it's also represents a fiscally sound district.
Further discussion on Article Number 1? Seeing none, the motion is that the reports of the district officers be accepted as printed. All those in favor of Article 1 as read, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes have it. We passed Article 1. We would call Superintendent Holliday to the podium for action on Article 2 to elect by ballot a moderator to serve through June 30th of 2018.
I'd like to call for nominations for the position of moderator to serve through June 30, 2018. Are there any nominations?
Ms. Moderator, I nominate Tim Arsenault as moderator through June 30th, 2018.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Are there any other nominations? Hearing none, I'd like to call for the vote. All in favor of Tim Arsenault as moderator of BUH District Number 6 through June 30, 2018, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. You have elected Tim Arsenault to serve as your moderator through June 30, 2018.
Thank you again. And before we move to Article Number 3, I beg the body's indulgence for a little history lesson. As I conclude my tenure as Brattleboro Union High School District Moderator, let's take a look back to the beginnings of this district. September 10th, 1956, less than a month before I was born, representatives from Brattleboro, Dummerston, Guilford, Putney, and, of course, Vernon met to form a regional high school district. The first presiding officer was Brattleboro attorney Elliott Barber, Jr. He also presided the next March for the initial budget voted at, get this, $477,089.56. Later that year, district voters approved a $994,000 bond for the building of the initial junior high school, which later became our middle school. The 1958 meeting had only 94 people here to vote, a figure not unlike the attendance numbers we've seen here for this gathering in recent years. 1957, the late John S. Burgess, another Brattleboro attorney, placed a nomination for moderator, and Barber withdrew from the election. Jack Burgess, elected to the Vermont legislature, then House Speaker and Lieutenant Governor. He was BUHS moderator through 1983, when he was replaced by Guilford resident and, yes, another prominent Brattleboro attorney, John Christensen. John would later represent Guilford and Vernon in the Vermont House. I was elected in 1999 to succeed John, and no, I am not a prominent Brattleboro attorney. Instead, I was in the midst of a 40-plus year career as a broadcaster, to which I credit my BUHS studies, which included being vice president of the Future Farmers of America chapter, with whetting my interest in the rules of procedure, rules that, covering many meetings in the area, I've seen both followed explicitly and mangled by a local government board. That previous year, I had been elected moderator in my native Vernon. I still hold that position, and I now serve my hometown as town clerk. The fact that there have only been 4 of us to hold this unpaid office is, in my view, quite significant. It shows the care in which the BUHS board members over the years have made their recommendations, and why the voters need to take care in choosing both a successor and holding them to a high standard. Our town, Vernon, as of June 30th, will no longer be in the district, but I still take pride in my upbringing, 6 years of which took place within this very building. Our responsibility as voters has been, is, and continues to be the students who spend 180 days a year here, the teachers and administrators who look to guide them on the right path, while all the voters assembled keep the tax bite affordable. It's been a high privilege to serve the voters of both my hometown and the high school from which I graduated. I thank you. With that, we shall move on to Article number 3, to elect by ballot a moderator to serve commencing July 1st of 2018. Is there a motion?
Mr. Moderator,
Ms. Beekman.
I nominate Stephen Brown as moderator from July 1st, 2018 through the ensuing year.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded that Stephen Brown be elected as moderator from July 1st, 2018 through the ensuing year. Mr. Brown, please stand and wave at the crowd so they know who you are. Any other nominations? Seeing none, all those in favor of electing Stephen Brown as moderator from July 1st, 2018 through the ensuing year, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes have it. You've elected Stephen Brown as moderator. Good luck.
Yeah.
Article number 4, to elect by ballot a clerk. Is there a motion on the floor?
Mr. Moderator.
My goodness, it is Mr. Murphy.
I nominate Barbara Nowakowski as clerk to serve for the ensuing year.
There a second? Moved and seconded that Barbara Nowakowski be elected as clerk to serve for the ensuing year. Other nominations? And seeing none, all those in favor of Barbara Nowakowski as clerk, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes have it. You've elected Barbara Nowakowski as clerk. Article number 5, to elect by ballot a treasurer. Is there a motion?
Yes, Mr. Moderator.
Mr. Janus.
It's my privilege to nominate Frank Rucker as treasurer to serve for the ensuing year.
Is there a second? Moved and seconded that Frank Rucker be elected as treasurer to serve for the ensuing year. Any other nominations? Seeing none, all those in favor of Frank Rucker as treasurer for the ensuing year, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes have it. You've elected Frank Rucker as treasurer. Article number 6, to elect by ballot one auditor to serve for 3 years. Is there a motion?
Mr. Moderator,
Mr. Torrey.
I nominate Richard DeGray as auditor to serve for the period of 3 years.
Is there a second? Moved and seconded that Richard DeGray be elected as auditor to serve for a period of 3 years. Any discussion? Any further nominations? Seeing none, all those in favor of Richard DeGray as auditor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes have it, and Mr. DeGray has been elected as auditor. Article 7, to see what salaries Brattleboro Union High School District 6 will vote to pay its auditors and directors. Is there a motion on the floor?
Mr. Moderator,
Ms. Barton.
I move that the Brattleboro Union High School District Number 6 be authorized to issue vouchers for the payment of its officers and directors for the ensuing fiscal year in the following amounts: to its clerk, the sum of $200; to its directors, the sum of $2,000 each, except that the chairman shall be paid an additional $1,000 for a total of $19,200.
Is there a second?
Seconded.
Moved and seconded that Brattleboro Union High School District Number 6 be authorized to issue vouchers for the payment of its officers and directors for the ensuing fiscal year in the following amounts: to its clerk, the sum of $200; to its directors, the sum of $2,000 each, except the chair shall be paid an additional $1,000 for a total of $19,200. Do we have discussion on the motion? And seeing none, all those in favor of Article 7 as read, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes have it. You have passed Article 7. We move to Article number 8. Shall the voters of the school district approve the school board to expend $24,591, which is the amount the school board has determined to be necessary for the ensuing fiscal year? It is estimated the proposed budget, if approved, will result in education spending of $17,443 per equalized pupil. This proposed spending per equalized pupil is 0.0% higher than spending for the current year. Do we have a motion?
Mr. Moderator.
Mr. Woodward.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I move that the school district approve the school board to expend $24,591,000, which is the amount the school board has determined to be necessary for the ensuing fiscal year. It is estimated that the proposed budget, if approved, will result in educational spending of $17,443 per equalized pupil. This projected spending per equalized pupil is 0% higher than spending for the current year. And if seconded, I would like to speak to the motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded that the school district approve the school board to expend $24,591,000, which is the amount the school board has determined to be necessary for the ensuing fiscal year. It's estimated the proposed budget, if approved, will result in education spending of $17,443 per equalized pupil. This proposed spending per equalized pupil is 0.0% higher than spending for the current fiscal year. Mr. Woodworth, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. And before I begin, I would just like to thank, on behalf of the Finance Committee, two of our members who will be retiring from Finance, Mike Collier from Vernon and Ruth Barton from Dummerston, who have served long and well and contributed a great deal to the workings of our Finance Committee. As usual, budget development for BUHS begins in October, and that's when the board sets out the parameters for the administrators. And now this is about 10 years, if not more, that we have given the staff the charge to develop a level service and as close to level funded budget as possible. This year we said a level funded budget. Once again, all departments and line items were reviewed. Discretionary spending is held once again level. Staff to student ratios were reviewed for every department. Our overall staffing levels are basically the same as the current budget, but human resources have been reallocated to maintain necessary programs and provide more support for our growing population of students who need extra help. It should be noted that salaries and benefits are nearly 80% of our total annual expenditures. Negotiated increases for certified and non-certified staff are included in this budget. The result of all this work was exactly what the board asked for, a level-funded budget presented to us in December. However, that's not the end of the story. As you may know, our tax rates are based on not just our expenditures, but on our spending per equalized pupil. This number was presented to us at the 11th hour by the state, I would say at 11 hours and 59 minutes almost. And our equalized pupil number was quite a bit lower than we had anticipated. As a result, it would have put us over the excess spending threshold and meant an intolerably large tax increase for our member towns. So back to the drawing board. With the deadline for public warning time approaching, the budget was revised twice with input from the public at 2 meetings in early January. Tough choices were made. The result is on page 6 of this summary book and is a 3% overall decrease in expenditures from this year. And if you have that book, turn to page 6, and I will just quickly go through by the major operating units to show how each contributed to this reduction overall request. The district-wide budget, which is about 4 lines down, that includes items such as operations and maintenance of the plant, which is a big item, nursing, library, and services that are across all 3 units. And that came out just about level with last year, within $53,000 or 0.5%. The senior high, as you can see 3 more lines down, was down 6.2% in their budget request. BAMS, grades 7 and 8, down 6.9%. The Career Center, down 2.3%. And if you look at the very bottom, you come to the number that I put in the I didn't put it in the motion, we put in the motion, $24,591,000, which is a decrease of 3%. over last year's budget. Now, these expense changes by themselves would still not get us where we wanted to be with the tax rate, so we will utilize part of our general fund and capital fund balances, and that's noted on page 8, which shows both of those funds, the general fund and the one we have for capital reserve, and we will be utilizing $915,000 from the general fund and $370,000 from the capital fund to help defray and minimize the tax impact. Now, that is an area of some concern. However, that decision, the amount was decided, and we are still at about what is a targeted percentage of annual budget in our reserve fund, which is about 10%. So we're still not jeopardizing our reserves more than necessary. We feel that this equalized pupil situation is somewhat of a one-time, although we realize that student population is definitely reduced from prior years. That number seems to be stabilizing, but we decided to appropriate some of our fund balance to help defray the taxes. So it leaves us with a general fund balance of about 10% of an annual budget. In summary, this budget allows us to meet the educational expectations of the state and our communities, providing a first-class education at a cost that taxpayers support and value. The BUHS board has approved this budget. We appreciate the efforts of staff and administrators to present a responsible spending plan for the coming year, and we hope you will approve this budget as presented. Thank you.
Further discussion on Article number 8. Gentlemen, actually it's a young lady with the voter card there on this side. I believe it was you, and if my eyes aren't failing me, that would be Mrs. Normando. Please wait for the microphone.
Thank you. Jody Normando of Dummerston. I have a question, not necessarily, well, I guess it pertains to the budget. I tried to follow the explanation on BCTV at the Brattleboro High School board meeting last time about tuitions, and I got rather confused. So I guess, Frank, maybe you could enlighten me a little bit. I have several questions pertaining to it. I have a question as to what is the general amount of tuition. Also, with that, I'm assuming that Vernon will be paying that amount. I don't know what Guilford pays for tuition. And I want to know, you made a comment about there are some schools that have high school choice, but I wasn't clear about which schools were in that circle and which schools weren't. I'm looking at your list here of enrollment, and you've got students from around our district, plus Marlboro, Dover, and then you've got other. And then I get totally confused about the Career Center as to how that operates. Who pays the tuition for that? Is that a high school choice? Because it's in our budget. So if you could answer all of those questions, Frank, if you don't remember them, I will remind you. Thank you.
Mr. Rucker, you're queried.
Okay, yes, good questions, and I understand why it's not easily understood, but I'll do the best I can to interpret the way in which the state assigns tuition and allows public schools to develop a tuition rate. So if I could start with that, the tuition rate is essentially a regular education figure, which means we start with all spending and we subtract special education expenditures, also transportation, food service, and any other revenue sources that pay for programs. So things like we get a Title I sub-grant, we have to remove that, and so on. So when we talk about tuition, we start with regular education. If we look in our book here, we can see the revenue sources. That's on our page 14 and 15. And tuition is primarily on page 14. The upper section of page 14 is fund balance. That was not your question, but in the middle of the page 14 you see the revenue budget. So, and it happens to be the first line in the revenues there is the tuition line. And so you're asking a question about a significant change in fiscal year 19 from all prior years, and it has to do with Vernon withdrawing from the union. So you see the line of figures there on the very first line. Fiscal year 17 budget gives you a little history. We budgeted $980,000. We received $1,159,000. That's about 12 kids more than we expected. And then in fiscal year 18, you see we increased the budget, which is the current year, the anticipated revenues to $1,228,000. That's on a tuition rate of $15,250. And then on fiscal year 19, the proposed budget. Now remember, these are revenues. These are not figures that we vote on tonight, but they help pay the bill. They go into the tax rate calculation. And you can see that there's a very significant increase there. So I think that kind of gets to your question about who's in and who's out. So you see we go from $1,228,000 for this budget right now, fiscal year 18, and we go to $3,284,000. Difference of $2,055,000. That's primarily the additional revenue that comes in from Vernon, because they are now just like Dover or Marlboro or any of the other non-member towns of Brattleboro Union. So we, as we have talked in the past about the issue of Vernon withdrawing and what is the effect, we're seeing it as we had anticipated. Vernon, we anticipate the same 120 or 130 students that have been choosing to come to Brattleboro Union High School are going to continue to do that. They've always had the choice to go to Pioneer or anywhere else they want. They've been choosing in the majority to come to Brattleboro Union, so we assume that will happen, and that is what, as they say, accounts for this, the largest portion of that increase. It's about 120 regular ed tuition students for Vernon times 15,500, and now we can get into some of the other questions that you raised. Unless you wanted any more clarity on that piece, I wanted to speak to you about the Career Center, a whole different funding formula. So the tuition is $15,500 for fiscal year 19. Yes. Okay, so the Career Center. Brattleboro Union High School is unique among union high schools in that we host a Career Center. And it's a fairly complicated funding mechanism that many folks have tried to change over the years and have not been able to. The issue is, as you alluded to, Brattleboro Union High School, even though when we vote on this article of $24,591,000, it includes the Career Center, the state requires the high school to pay the Career Center, which essentially is saying we're paying ourselves. This is part of the way in which the state funds career centers. So the way we see that is on page 24. Page 24 helps us understand how we set a tuition rate, not only for, let's say, Leland and Gray students and Twin Valley students, but also for Brattleboro Union High School senior high. And I'll show you where that shows up in the budget. So here we go on page 24 at the very top. You see we have the Career Center budget of $2,430,000, and Mr. Woodworth identified that number in the summary document just a little while ago. That was one number of the several that add up to the $24,591,000. Within the BUHS budget, there are a number of services that the Career Center utilizes. That's on page 25. It's those district-wide services, which include the use of the facility. That's the single largest allocation of cost to the Career Center. So we add that to the Career Center's $2,430,000, and then we start taking away revenues that the state says, well, you're not going to make a profit when you come into calculating a tuition rate. So the state identifies those revenues that come to the Career Center that we can't charge, Dover and Marlboro and Wardsboro and those other communities, because we're getting those revenues. So they are listed there. They're various state grants. So we come down to spending minus revenues that we get from other sources, and we get a net number. It says net educational program expenses of $2,134,000, and now we divide that by the number of students we expect to attend the Career Center. 130, you see that, 130.56. Divide those two numbers, and right in the middle of the page, net cost per student is $16,350. See that? That's the Career Center tuition. So the last piece to answer your question is, where does that fit into the senior high budget? And that's at the very bottom of the page, page 24. Of the 130 students, 92 are our own kids here at Brattleboro Union High School. And so 92 kids times 16,350 is 1,508,000. That number, 1,508,000, is included in the 24,591,000 total that we're going to vote on. And as I say, this is the way the state requires career centers to be funded. If we didn't have the Career Center, or when we compare ourselves to other systems, it's important to recognize that the state has this convention that makes us look like we spend more than union high schools that don't have career centers, and this is part of it. The last piece, maybe to address what you had asked about, is the other towns. So I mentioned 120 regular ed students from Vernon. Well, then there's an additional 11 that's included in the non-member tech FTE student population. It also includes a few kids from the Twin Valley, a few kids from Leland and Gray, and they pay $16,350 as well. We also do have a few kids from Hinsdale that pay tuition. So all of those tuition receipts reduce the amount that we have to raise in taxes. So it's a benefit. But maybe to tie it all together, just one last thing, you might say, well, look, we're getting all this extra revenue, so why is it that our taxes aren't going down? Because aren't other people paying our bills? And the last piece on page 16 in the annual report is the tax calculation. And I won't go through all of this unless someone is interested, but the point that Mr. Woodworth has already made, and this kind of connects the dots here, is line 12. on page 16. This is the state of Vermont's document that they send to all public schools in the state of Vermont, and they say you will publish this in your annual report, so that's what we've done. But line 12, you see that we've gone from 1,156 students in fiscal year 18 on line 12, 1,156, down to 960. Okay? So that is a loss of 197 students. And most of those are those Vernon kids. So you see what happened is we got a lot of revenue to help pay for educating all of our kids here at BUHS, but the state sets a tax rate based on cost per student, and it's net of tuition, it's net of revenue. So the last piece is on page 16, we've got 24,591 is the article that's been warned, very first number on that page, on page 16. And then we subtract, on line 9, we subtract all of this revenue, most of which that we've been talking about is tuition. We subtract $7.8 million in revenue that we don't need to collect from taxes because it's coming in the form of tuition and different types of grants. So we have a net, what we call education spending. It's what the state calls education spending. That's on line 11. This is something that everyone in the state does. This is not unique to Brattleboro Union. And this is what, again, Mr. Woodworth was the opening remarks were that when we had such a dramatic drop in enrollment, well, we had a significant amount of new revenue to help offset that, but not enough. Ultimately, it's that net spending of $16,749,000 divided by the 960 students is $17,443 per student, and that number is very close to what a tax rate will be. Just move the decimal over to, if you did that to 1.744, that's how they get to a tax rate. There are a few adjustments that are a little confusing, but when the state's all done with their computations, your tax rate is very close to your cost per student. And so I'm hoping I made enough connections between the importance of revenue, but matching that up to the student population so that when you calculate your cost per student, you've taken into account all of those.
Further discussion, Mr. DeGray.
Thank you. Frank, you had me a little confused because one of the things you didn't talk about, if you turn to page 15 and you look at the revenue, proposed revenue, it is $23,676,000. That's $1,422,697 less than last year. Now, everybody's been talking about the $3 million because that's the glossy number. But you look up at the top line, the State General Fund Support Grant, that's down $3,125,000. And that is because student enrollment, am I correct?
Not really.
Why is that number down?
Yeah. Another great question. So we're going to get into the funding formula and how it works because that's the only way I can explain it. So the way things work is we start with total board-approved spending. So that's the $24,591,000. Then we look at all other sources of revenue, other than the number you are asking about, okay? We look at tuition, we look at grants, we look at every other number that you see on those two pages. We subtract all of those numbers from the $24,591,000. We subtract it from the proposed spending. And the number you're asking about is the number that balances the budget. So if you follow that, because tuition is up $2 million and fund balance is up, use of fund balance is up $654,000, as you see on page 15, we don't need what we needed the prior year, $19 million, because those revenue sources are paying down the amount that we need from the state. You are seeing a lower number. That's how you understand that. You're making a very good point in that, see, last year we had the $19,084,000 on page 15, the number you were referring to, but we had 1,156 kids to divide that into. This year, we've got tuition revenue that's buying that down, and we've got spending cuts that's reducing that number, as Mr. Woodworth indicated, $768,000, and we are using more fund balance, so we are down to $15,959,000 for the state figure that sets. It's the basis of how you divide your kids into a number to get a tax rate. The thing is we only have 960 kids this year, so we had to have that number come down. The way we got it down is what I just said, cutting spending by $768,000, increasing revenue by $2 million, and increasing use of fund balance.
I caught part of your budget proposal on BCTV, and on page 12, when Mr. Reichman was questioning you from the Finance Committee, he was talking about cuts, and the amount of money, $409,918, which gets paid for tuition from the high school to the Career Center. And then when I look on, I need you to explain this to me, is when I look on page 15, and then when I look at tuition BUHS to Wyndham Career, it says $219,165. What is the difference between, why are those numbers different versus the number of 409?
Yeah. So those figures come from, if we go back to page 24, where we were talking about how we set a tuition rate for the Career Center and then how it filters through the high school. Bottom of page 24, you see that there's that same number you were looking for, 409,000. And it is the difference between having, in the current year, 144 kids. So now I'm looking at the student count, and the current count was 144 kids, of which 117 were BUHS students. You see that? Mm-hmm. Okay. So this year we took 117 BUHS students times this current year's tuition rate of $16,310, and we got $1,918,000. But when we have fewer students, we went from 117 kids down to 92. You see that? Tuition rate's about the same, but it's the significant drop in the number of BUHS students attending the Career Center creates that significant reduction in the tuition assessment to the high school. So there's your 409. That's where it comes from.
Why is the line item different for the Career Center in the budget on page 23, where the voc ed total is $2,361,601 for a reduction of $64,976, and then when I look on page 24, total operating budget is $2,430,780 for a difference of $57,362. Why would those numbers be different?
You got to go down a couple more lines on page 23. So you were correctly looking at program 300, vocational ed, but you got to keep going a little bit further down where there's adult ed. It's also within the Career Center. The state asks us to assign that to program 600, so that's why it's not in the same group. But then you see when you add the 2,361,000 as you were looking at, and you add the 69,180 for the adult ed, you are at that same number, 2,430,000, and you're at the same 57,000 change that you see on page 24.
A couple more questions. Page 27, the capital plan. I will say I am really disappointed to see that you have $190,000 that you put in the operating budget to pay for capital. When you started the process, you were sitting on about $3.2 million of surplus revenue, excluding what you have in the capital. And I'm not a big fond of funding capital projects through the operating budget, especially when you have money in your pocket to use. I think that you save the taxpayers money when you pay for something that's tangible. And obviously, a $350,000 building is something that will increase in value. The question I have for you is looking at next year's capital plan, and I have a huge concern here when I see Natowich Field and the resurfacing for $100,000 next year, and the following year is $100,000. And can you tell me what that constitutes?
Do you want me to speak to that, or
Maybe Robert.
Yeah, well, I don't think he would be. Yeah, let me, I'll start with that, and I think the Finance Committee or maybe Mr. Perrin can fill in the gaps, but so what this represents is, initially, back in July, the Finance Committee met a few times over the issue of the grandstand on Tenney Field. And we had a preliminary recommendation, so this would be the administration having a recommendation to the Finance Committee to essentially deconstruct the grandstand. Subsequent to that recommendation, and I can go into the reasons for that if we're interested, but let me give you a quick recap. Members of the public joined our subsequent Finance Committee.
Can I hold you up? Mm-hmm. I see $50,000 in year 2021 for Tenney Field. And what I'm talking about is Natowich Field resurfacing.
Yeah, so it's all connected. So here's the condensed version. Folks from the general public came and expressed a lot of interest in asking the Finance Committee to reconsider deconstructing the grandstand project. The Finance Committee reevaluated its priorities and as you see, settled with this primarily a $340,000 investment in fiscal year 19 for a long overdue maintenance shed. The point is that the Natowich Field, the Tenney Field improvement, and the practice field, which is also a line item in this group, are all connected to a long-term facility plan. So the answer to your question is that the Natowich Field, 100,000 in 2020 and then the 2021 is a placeholder where we know we need to make an investment, but it is not it's unlikely that it will be specifically for resurfacing. We do know we need to address some resurfacing issues there, and we need to address the goalposts and the reorientation of the field. But I would expect to see those allocations to change based on the Finance Committee's consideration of the needs. The other issue that is unknown at this time is the status of the Famolari fields that we lease. So this is all part of us trying to be proactive around accommodating our student activities.
So this is not for artificial surfaces for the football or other field space up there?
That's correct at this time. That has been discussed, but there's been no decision on moving in that direction at this point. It's just...
We won't be playing football in Vermont in 10 years.
Tim?
Mr. Woodworth.
Could I just elaborate on that a little bit on behalf of the Finance Committee? I didn't mean to throw that one at Frank. That was our work. But it is part of an entire review of all the athletic complex. As Frank noted, the Famolari Field, we don't know what our future will be up there. We hope it'll be secure for a while. We have the softball field. We have a lot of athletic teams, more teams than ever. There are women's sports that have developed over the years that weren't around 20, 30 years ago. Ultimate Frisbee is very popular. So we have a large demand for field space and not a huge amount of space compared to some other schools that are building flatter plains to accommodate that. So we are looking at the entire picture. We recently had a topographic review of the practice field to see what we might be able to do there in terms of expanding that and making it more useful. With the number of sports that are being played, it's going to be more challenging rather than less challenging coming up. So before we take action in any one particular way as it relates to the field, we want to have a pretty good survey presented to us as to what the future needs are. And however, the maintenance facility is a deferred item that we really need to address that, and so we wanted to leave that in this year's budget in spite of the pressure to reduce things. Thank you.
Further discussion on Article number 8. The lady over about halfway down here.
Hello. Hi. I have a question. Can you tell me
name,
what
ma'am?
the...
Your name?
Pardon?
Your name, please?
Jane Baker.
Thank you.
Can you tell me what the enrollment is for BAMS versus the enrollment for the vocational center?
The administration is queried. Mr. Rucker or Mr. Woodworth?
BAMS is approximately 290, is that correct? Yeah, and then your question, was it the Career Center?
The Career Center, yeah.
Yeah, the Career Center is that 150. We have to publish, as we were talking about earlier, a number of 130 on page 24. We have to publish a 6-semester average for purposes of setting tuition rates and so on. But our current enrollment is about 150, I believe. Is that right, Michael? Yeah.
Okay, so my question is, in that case, it looks like BAMS was asked to reduce their spending by 6.9%, and the Career Center 2.3%. So BAMS was asked to take 3 times as much away from their budget, and they have 3 times almost less students, or 2?
So what that relates to is it's not really a disproportionate burden in terms of cost reductions. What it reflects is the high school principal and the middle school principal have recommended that we reevaluate a program that is shared, and we have moved a significant amount of costs into the district-wide. So if you looked at page 17, you would see sort of an equivalent increase that you're noting for the BAMS budget. So you see, as you noted, BAMS is down $238,000, but in the direct instruction, you see that first line on page 17 is up about the same amount of money, $236,000, and most of that is simply shifting what was formerly a program dedicated exclusively to middle school and shifting that to district-wide so that it can be a continuum of services grades 7 through 12 instead of separated by grade level.
Further discussion on Article number 8. Seeing none, I'll repeat the lady in the center.
Getting out of...
And please state your name when you start. Thank you.
Mary Casey? That work?
Yeah.
Getting out of the weeds a little bit, just as far as working on the budget. Our students are dropping, and it looks like personnel, once again, is increasing this year. I was hoping you could tell me what your adult versus child ratio is currently, and what your goal is for that. And secondly, I believe it was Mr. Woodsworth believes the student population is stabilizing now, and I'd be interested in why that belief is. That would be a good thing. I was interested in why that was stated.
Mr. Woodward.
Thank you. Equalized pupils are a bit of a challenge to get your...
That's not what I'm talking. I'm actually talking about real live bodies. I know that for spending, I understand equalized, you took a hit this year, part of that for the lack of consolidation. I think your hold harmless was at like 3-4%. You took a 16
about
point
70
some
students, yeah.
Yeah, you took I get the equalized student part. I'm actually, that's what I said, getting out of the weeds a little bit, talking about real live people.
How many people are in the seats?
The student population is dropping, and we're hiring additional personnel. Of course, personnel in any school, including Brattleboro, is your highest expense. I was pleased to hear you say that you thought the student population was stabilizing. I was wondering what your ratio of adult, Vermont has is kind of in trouble with that, your personnel versus child ratio is, and what you think the ideal might be there. You did, and the second was why real live bodies you think may be stabilizing.
Well, I'm going to let Frank talk about the ratio, but I will talk about the projected census of students. And for BAMS, for next year, it is projected to be just slightly below where it is by about 10 students right now. BUHS is projected to go up from 798 current to 826 next year. Now, this is based on surveys for BAMS of the elementary schools, who's coming in from 6th grade, and what it anticipated from other towns. For BUHS, we were looking at who's graduating, and also next who is coming in as freshmen. So we're anticipating an increase there, and we're anticipating in the Career Center to have just about the same number of kids in the Career Center, and percentage-wise, about 80% of them, as Frank said, are BUHS. As to the exact staff-to-student ratio, I'm going to pass along on that because I don't know the number.
Not the teacher students.
Staff, that's
the
right.
Adults.
Yeah, staff, adults, yeah. Well, most of them are adults.
Yeah. Yeah. So you may have seen the Secretary of Education's memorandum on the concern that has been shared with many folks statewide. And in that memorandum, she gives us data that compares Vermont to other rural states and then also to the national average. And when we talk about total employees and total enrollment, the state average is 4.5 students per employee in Vermont. That's the Vermont state average, which is well below national. Now that includes, it is an FTE figure, but when we're talking about Brattleboro Union High School and the town school, Brattleboro Town School, we're talking about including crossing guards, our custodians, our nurses, our bus drivers, in some cases where we hire bus drivers. So we're talking about everyone. BUHS's statistic is 6 students per employee. So we're well above the average, and yet we did make a number of staff changes in this budget. We did have some staff reductions.
Staff reductions, a net staff reduction, or you actually had a net full personnel increase in staff?
Net, as Mr. Woodworth has said, is we're about the same. But we did make staff reductions where we saw enrollment low in certain programs.
You created new positions.
But we created new positions, and in particular the ones that the earlier question related to around student support.
Okay, I'm just going by your summary, and I think the summary had a net increase in personnel.
It is very level. It's not significant, but I believe there is probably a additional position. In total, we have 183 positions, FTE positions, and we are right in that neighborhood.
Further discussion on Article number 8. Gentleman on this side of the room with his hand up, leave your hand up and wait for the microphone, Pastor.
Michael Bosworth, Brattleboro. I want to feel a little bit better understanding and feeling about the use of the fund balance. I realize we entered the year a pretty robust fund balance, and so we were able to use $915,000 and still have about 10% left, or about 10% of our regular budget still left in the fund balance after that use. But going forward, every year now, we have to find that $915,000 somewhere. Is that not correct? And so I want to know, are there ideas about where it will come from in the future? Just repeatedly use the fund balance, or how are we going to address that in the future?
The administration and/or school board is interrogated.
So,
Mr. Rudder.
So, you want to just start? Yeah, so we recognize that it's not something that we could sustain for 5 years, but we certainly could sustain it for within enough of a planning phase to review our programs and react accordingly. As Mr. Woodworth said, we had a very short notice on our ability to adjust to this change in Act 46, Act 49, the adjustments to hold harmless provisions. So, we did go through a revision process, and we had a result that allowed us to come in with a very stable tax rate. But if we don't see a significant increase in, or not nearly, I wouldn't say significant, but either a stable or somewhat of an increase in enrollment over the next 2 years, we will have to reevaluate our spending and adjust accordingly. You may know that the State Board of Ed is expected to make a determination in June of this year around governance structures. So this is another one of those major unknowns that until we see those sorts of things, we will plan accordingly. But there's been a lot of legislative changes that have been difficult to anticipate. So fortunately, we have had the fund balance to stabilize the tax rate, but we will take in these these considerations and make sure we have at least a 3-year path of stability from a fiscal solvency point of view.
Further discussion on Article number 8. Seeing none, I shall repeat the motion that the school district approve the school board to expend $24,591,000, which is the amount the school board has determined to be needed for the ensuing fiscal year. It is estimated that this proposed budget, if approved, will result in education spending of $17,443 per equalized pupil. This projected spending per equalized pupil is 0.0% higher than spending for the current year. All those in favor of Article 8 as read, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes have it. You have passed Article 8. Article 9, to transact any other business that may legally come before the meeting. Do we have anybody that would like to speak? It sounds like Mrs. Holliday would like the floor, and I believe I'll also need the numbers from the clerks before we adjourn. Mrs. Holliday, you have the floor.
So we have a number of people this evening that this will be their last meeting. So I would like to first recognize from Dummerston, Ruth Barton, for her 15 years as school board director. We'd also like to recognize Michael Collier for his 6 years serving on BU number 6 as school board director. And lastly, in recognition and appreciation of your dedication and service to the Brattleboro Union School District number 6 during 19 years as school district moderator, Tim Arsenault.
Thank you. Further discussion under Article 9, other business that may legally come before the meeting. We need an account from the clerks, if you have one back there. Because I'm very curious what the number of people are who attended this meeting tonight. It looks like that number is going to be forthcoming. Anybody else have anything to come before this meeting? Mr. DeGray.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I think last year or the year before I talked about the booklet significantly changing. And I just want to make sure that I'm on the record to say that this is extremely difficult to follow. When I look at the Career Center, I have no idea of what you're spending on programming. And if I could question that, or students in programming. And I think, Frank, you said this was dictated from the state, the way that this is formulated?
Much format is required, but as far as enhancing a narrative around helping to understand and articulate the programs, we can certainly do that.
Well, like I said, it's extremely difficult, and I'm someone who actually looks at the book and looks at all the different numbers, and I do take pride in that. And someone who has done it for a long time and put this budget together, I find it increasingly difficult to follow and to question you, which is, one of the things I do take great joy in. Kind of makes my February go by. But I do find this extremely difficult to follow, and I would suspect other people feel the same way. So I would hope that the board would do everything in its power to make this more legible for people who want to take a look at it and question what's actually in it. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have a number yet from the back of the room? Okay, anybody else would like to be recognized under other business? The young lady right here. Wait for a microphone, ma'am. It's coming your way. And your name, please.
My name is Mary White, and I live in Brattleboro, and I just want to say thank you very much for your hard work. This is not easy, and I think you did a great job. I understand the time constraints, and I also appreciate keeping that diversity position in the budget.
It looks like we will not be reading the number into the record, as the clerks are still compiling it. I will entertain at this point a motion to adjourn. Is there a second? All those in favor of ending this meeting, please say aye. Aye. The 2018 Brattleboro Union High School District meeting is adjourned.
Questions?
It's still